A reviewer tells you they addressed every concern, then keeps their score anyway. The NeurIPS 2026 review process just got a lot more confusing. Imagine this: you spent days crafting a detailed rebuttal for your NeurIPS paper. Every concern your reviewer raised, you addressed it with new experiments, clearer explanations, and additional analysis. You feel good about it. Then the reviewer updates their summary, says your concerns are addressed, and keeps their score exactly the same. Does that make sense? It is the question that a poster on the machine learning subreddit asked about NeurIPS 2026. And the response from the community was a firestorm of frustration, empathy, and some genuinely hot takes about how the peer review process has evolved. If you have ever been a researcher who has submitted to a top conference, you know this feeling intimately. The rebuttal was supposed to be your chance to fix misunderstandings and strengthen your case, but somewhere along the way, it became something else entirely. Here is what the original poster wrote. They called it potentially a hot take, and they questioned why the research community is plagued with reviewers who acknowledge that their concerns were addressed by a rebuttal, yet still decide to maintain their score because they simply do not vibe with the paper. Their plea was straightforward: if you list a set of concerns in your review and those concerns are addressed during the rebuttal, please adjust your score accordingly. This should apply whether or not you personally like the paper and its methodology. Their core argument was about the nature of scientific research itself. The beauty of scientific research, they wrote, is that we each get to explore ideas that we find meaningful, whose value may not be immediately obvious to every individual reviewer. It is a fair point. But the comment thread that followed revealed that this is not just about one reviewer or one paper. One commenter named ProtoN made a point that really stuck with the community. They argued that the rebuttal is primarily for clarifying whether you understand the current PDF correctly and whether your arguments against the paper are valid. It is not what you should do to go from revision 1 to revision 2, especially since reviewers are not even allowed to see revision 2. This is a fundamental distinction that gets lost in the process. The rebuttal is a dialogue, not a to-do list, but many reviewers treat it as an opportunity to request additional experiments or analyses that go beyond fixing the original critique. And authors, desperate for acceptance, deliver. The mismatch between what the rebuttal is supposed to be and what it has become is at the heart of the debate. Another commenter, dnunez90+9, introduced what they called the ceiling effect. They asked whether each set of core contributions has a ceiling, meaning the maximum score they would give for that particular contribution regardless of how flawless the execution is. This is a subtle but important insight. Some papers have fundamental limitations that no amount of rebuttal can overcome. A method might be clean and well executed, but still address a narrow problem with incremental improvements. No amount of additional ablation studies or comparison experiments will change the fact that the core contribution is modest. Commenter Project Treadstone expanded on this, noting that many methods and experiments have limitations or upper limits that cannot be fixed with a rebuttal, particularly when the score is already within the acceptance bar. This is the hard truth of peer review. Sometimes a paper is good enough to be accepted, but not good enough to be great. Commenter Eterna Isaro brought up the nuance of incremental work. They acknowledged that incremental works with small improvements are a thing, but argued that it is still worth writing them up because the contribution size is part of the review too. Their point was that if a reviewer was silent about the contribution being insignificant during the initial review, then it is fair to expect score improvements after addressing the flaws they did point out. It is a reasonable argument, but it also highlights a structural problem. Reviewers often do not explicitly call out contribution size as a major issue in their initial review. They focus on methodology, experiments, and clarity. Then during the rebuttal phase, when authors have fixed those technical issues, the reviewer realizes that the paper still does not meet their threshold for significance, and now they feel justified in holding their score. One commenter named Common Sense Skeptic One offered what they called an even hotter take. A reviewer reviews a paper as is, not a future version that might be. This is the purest argument for the status quo. When you submit a paper, you submit a specific document at a specific moment in time. The review is about that document, not a hypothetical improved version. If a reviewer wants additional experiments or analysis, that is fine. But if those things are not in the paper and the reviewer is rating it on its current merits, then the score should reflect what is actually there. The rebuttal is not a revision process. It is a chance to correct misunderstandings and clarify what the paper already does. Anything beyond that is bonus material that should not fundamentally change the assessment of the original submission. The most relatable part of the thread came from authors sharing their own experiences. One commenter named Grumpkit described having 2 reviewers wait until the weekend to ask for additional experiments. They happened to run those experiments in advance because they suspected they might be asked, posted the response, and both reviewers said all concerns were addressed and they would keep their score. Grumpkit described it as utterly disheartening and disappointing. Another author, Gene Pool Party DJ, cited one of their reviewers who literally said the authors have addressed their concerns, but they would keep their rate as is. It was at least a weekly accept to begin with. These are not stories of bad faith review. These are stories of reasonable reviewers who, after a thorough rebuttal, still feel the paper does not meet their personal threshold for the score they initially gave. It is frustrating, but it is also part of the subjective nature of peer review. As the thread evolved, 2 particularly sharp comments from a commenter named D. Dofer stood out. First, you are allowed to change your score by more than 1 point. In many review systems, reviewers are implicitly constrained to small score shifts, but the system allows larger movements, and perhaps reviewers should use that flexibility more aggressively. Second, even hotter, you can also reduce your score. This is the flip side that rarely gets discussed. Reviewers rarely lower their score during rebuttal, even when authors fail to address concerns adequately. The asymmetry is real. The commenter Confused Serial summed up the broader frustration by saying that rebuttals have become a shit show because of the expectation that scores will rise if authors present enough new results. They observed that a paper gets a 3 or 4 because it simply does not have enough quality content for a higher score, and no amount of extra experiments will help. Reviewers find it difficult to say this is really shallow work, so they say, "Did you try this ablation instead?" in hopes that those comments would justify their rating. So where does this leave us? The NeurIPS 2026 debate reveals a fundamental tension in peer review. One side argues that if a reviewer's concerns are addressed, the score should move. The other side argues that the rebuttal is for clarification, not revision, and the score reflects a holistic judgment that may not change even when technical issues are resolved. Both positions are valid. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Reviewers should be more explicit about what kind of changes would actually move their score, and authors should understand that not every concern is equally weighty. The system is imperfect, but it is the system we have. What do you think? Should reviewers be required to raise their score when concerns are addressed, or is the current flexibility more fair? Let me know in the comments below, and if you found this breakdown useful. Hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the research publishing world. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with your own review experience, share it in the comments. Subscribe for more research process breakdowns, and I will see you in the next one.